delighted to welcome everyone to our fourth annual Business Ethics Colloquium, co-organized by the Real Colegio Complutense of Harvard University, the Institute for Ethics in Communication and Organizations of Valencia, Spain, and the Abigail Adams Institute. The topic of today's colloquium is building trust in organizations through meaningful work. My name is Bill English. I'm a research associate at the Ethics Center at Harvard and also the executive director of the Abigail Adams Institute. And I'll be moderating today's discussion. So our plan is to introduce each of our distinguished panelists before they speak, along with a general question that helps motivate their comments today. And after everyone's delivered their formal remarks, it'll be about 10 minutes each, we'll take a short break and reconvene for an extended discussion. And we do hope that discussion is rich and vigorous. Before we turn to the main show, though, I've been asked to say a few words introducing and framing today's topic. I think it's reasonable to say that work has historically had a negative connotation. Work is often done under the compulsion of necessity. One works to secure food and shelter and clothing. And in the pre-industrial era, at least, this required long hours and hard labor for many. In the ancient world, freedom was defined in part by freedom from work, which was the domain of artisans, merchants, and slaves. And in the development of Europe, one of the classic privileges of aristocracy was precisely that their accumulated wealth meant that they didn't have to work. In contrast, life amongst what we call the working class was difficult, tiring, and precarious. So work, one might conclude, is an affliction borne by those who are unfortunate. Now, over the last 3 centuries, we witnessed an extraordinary explosion of economic growth and higher living standards, propelled not only by work, but also by industrial revolutions, technological discoveries, the rule of law, the extension of markets, and the development of better political, economic, and monetary institutions. One of the most astute early observers of this process, Adam Smith, famously suggested that humans have a natural inclination to what he called truck, barter, and exchange. And in the first part of The Wealth of Nations, Smith even argues that we benefit morally and intellectually from the experience of work. So that's all to suggest that human nature might be fulfilled in some essential way through work. However, towards the end of The Wealth of Nations, Smith also notes that the division of labor, this great motor of capitalist production, has a dark side. And that's because specialization tends to focus the mind of workers on some narrow set of tasks. And this makes them, in Smith's own words, quote, stupid and ignorant. Karl Marx later praised this passage in the context of making his own argument that modern work is alienating. And by alienating, Marx seems to mean that in a complex economy, worker isn't able to directly see the good that their work accomplishes. So there's simply this a paid small cog in this much larger machine that has no clear meaning for them beyond the immediate wages they receive. Now, Marx's economic analysis and proposals have notorious problems, and his solution to alienation seems to be that in an ideal communist society, we could all alternate through different jobs. As he puts it at one point, you can hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, and criticize after dinner without ever becoming a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. So that's all to say work would have an immediate productive meaning, and no one would have to be too narrowly focused. This whimsical vision sounds a lot like the life of an English aristocrat. And in fact, it bears some ironic similarity, I think, to another prediction made by one of the leading economists of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, who consciously himself aspired to another sort of aristocratic life. So contrary to Marx, Keynes saw that economic growth was dramatically raising the standards of all classes, particularly the poor. And in his famous essay on the economic possibilities for our grandchildren, Keynes predicted that in the future we'd be so wealthy and so technologically advanced that no one will really have to work. He acknowledged that some people might still choose to work because it's meaningful, but he believed that most would dedicate their lives to traditional leisure pursuits in sports, arts, and letters, and so on. So both Keynes and Marx hoped that all work might become meaningful, but they expected that we do a lot less of it. So we're obviously a long way away from the world of abundance that Keynes predicted. But the contemporary economist Tyler Cowen has recently noted that some of Keynes' assumptions about work already appear to be mistaken. Even as Americans become wealthier, they work very long hours. This is particularly true in medicine, law, and finance. And there's even some evidence that it holds true of lottery winners, which surprised me. Conversely, when we examine those who have become unemployed, even when they receive significant benefits, they tend to have higher levels of unhappiness, depression, substance abuse, and suicide than their working peers. Cowen notes that many factors may be influencing these trends, but he ultimately endorses a simple conclusion, namely that in addition to being motivated by income, many people find work fulfilling and meaningful. Now, if this is true, it not only provides an explanation of some counterintuitive economic trends, but also an opportunity, for it suggests that meaningful work may hold clues for motivating, productive, sustained, and committed economic activity. So there are a lot of questions we might ask about meaningful work in today's colloquium. In the first instance, what makes work meaningful? Can all work be meaningful, or is it a mistake to think that all forms of labor can or should be meaningful? As a matter of ethics, should we be more concerned with something else? Should the work be, say, dignified or fair or consensual, etc.? Finally, from a management perspective, can firms do a better job of making work meaningful or of selecting employees who find it meaningful? And if so, what benefits might this bring? If people find meaning in their work, is there ultimately more reason to trust that they'll do a good job? These are questions on the table that I hope our panelists will help us think through, as well as other related questions that I haven't even touched on. Without further ado, I want to turn to them and get our discussion rolling.